Hello everyone, my name is Suzanne Painter and I'm an associate professor and the lead instructor for the course. As we begin Module 5, I want to reorient you as to where we are and where we are headed between now and the end of the course. We started by looking at the context for change and the current description of your school in terms of its demographics and the extent to which you perceive the culture embodied the change principles you read about in Chapter 1. In Modules 3 and 4, you looked at teacher reactions to a specific change, their stages of concern, and their levels of use. Next, we will look at leaders who facilitate the change. And in the last part of the course, we will pull back from your specific site for a broader view, including a question some of you have asked: who decides what changes are implemented, and who should decide? This week, though, in Module 5, we'll turn our attention to examining how the change initiative is being supported and facilitated at the leadership level. In other words, what can leaders do to help the implementation of a change? There are 3 chapters that are key. You already read Chapter 2 on functions. This week, you will read Chapters 6 and 8. Recall that in Chapter 2, Hall and Horde described the 6 functions of interventions. Leaders must take action to assure these functions are completed if change will be enacted. Hall and Horde refer to leaders who facilitate change as change facilitators. They and other researchers have found that when change is viewed as an event, change facilitators will plan all the activities for the change in great detail, often beginning with a lot of fanfare around the announcement and a training workshop for teachers. But once this event is over, there may be little ongoing attention. Many of you have experienced change implementation done this way. The 6 functions of intervention laid out in Chapter 2 address what else needs to be done. Then in Chapter 6, we'll explore 3 different change facilitator styles. Hall and Horde identified these styles from their data collected from schools in their studies. They show how those leadership styles actually do or do not effectively support the implementation of change. Also in this chapter, you will see strategies for working with leaders who have different styles. Moving on to Chapter 7, it's concerned with professional learning communities. That's a term that has been widely adopted, but people often mean very different things when they use the term. Note that Hall and Horde specifically cite the purpose of a PLC as teacher learning. They recommend jump-starting a stalled PLC by looking at student data, but the purpose of looking at that data is to cause teachers to think and learn, not simply to improve test scores. This chapter may help your case study quite a bit if your teachers are expected to work in PLCs. However, of this week's reading assignments, I would make this one a lower priority. I do want to spend a little time talking about Chapter 8 because it presents some important concepts that may take some time to grasp. In Chapter 8, the authors dive into the deep meaning of their phrase, change is learning. They ask the question, what is learning and how does it occur? In older conceptions of learning, still embodied widely in our teaching practices, it was thought that knowledge was a bit like a photograph that could be digitally shared. Everyone would see a concept the same way. But we now know better. Think about how someone has taken a photograph of you that they liked, but you thought didn't look good. Although you were viewing the same information, your interpretations were different. In this graphic, I depict the importance of prior knowledge and experiences in learning. At the top, you can see, we see and interpret the world from our prior experiences. Then we experience something new. We make sense of that new information by referring back to our prior knowledge. Then we incorporate the new information into these mental models, usually. Sometimes we reject the new information entirely. I tend to do that with information presented in some political advertisements. Sometimes we actually distort the new information as we try to reconcile it with what we already know and believe. But often, when we're learning, we change our prior knowledge and beliefs to accommodate that new information. And that's what we as teachers hope will happen when we're teaching. Now, Hall and Hord refer to this cycle as an interpretivist perspective on change. You may see that it's rooted in social constructivist views of learning. Now, apply this social constructivist views to a change that's introduced in schools. Each teacher looks at the change differently depending on where they're coming from, their prior knowledge. They have different reactions based on past experience, knowledge, and beliefs. Here's an example. A new science curriculum may be greeted with joy by the Bill Nye science geek teacher, while being viewed with dread by the teacher who never did well in science classes. And more importantly, as each one begins to talk about the change, a group concept can form, a socially constructed construct that, somewhat like a rumor, takes on a life of its own. So a science-phobic teacher may reach out to others and begin to discuss how the new curriculum is too hard or not appropriate for the age or ability of the students. Such stories about the new program can become deadly if they grow and coalesce. That's what Hall and Hord refer to as poisonous mushrooms. On the other hand, there will be teachers who are positive about the change. If you read the East Lake story at the end of the chapter, you can see how the nutritious mushroom can be nurtured. These nutritious mushrooms are not optional. They are essential if the change is going to become implemented. They represent the changed culture of the school. So you will want to look at how the leadership at East Lake responded to mushrooms and then think about your own school and what mushrooms are forming. Remember that determining what mushrooms are growing and whether they're poisonous or nutritious is essential to leadership of change. I hope you have a good week as you read these pieces of the text in order to meet the objectives of this module. It may help to imagine yourself as the change facilitator. Go back to Chapter 2 to review the functions that need to be accomplished. Review Chapter 6 for the change facilitator styles. Read Chapter 7 if you have time about PLCs. And finally, spend some time with Chapter 8 to ensure that you understand the styles of the types of mushrooms and what can be done. And then you'll use this information in this week's memo, analyzing your school's change initiative from a teacher perspective, from a leadership perspective, and you'll add yet another layer of complexity and nuance to your story.